Welcome to your daily dose of theological German. We are continuing through this Paul Tillich article, which is an essay taken out of this book called The Religious Substance of Culture. Just for the context, you will need to recall, if you were watching last week's videos, what we are talking about here in this Paul Tillich article, or rather what Paul Tillich is talking about, where he's been explaining how in the kind of empirical sciences, there's always this question of right or wrong, true or false, that somehow there's an absolute reality out there, and the things we say about it can either be true or false or neither, but those are the categories that apply. And then he talks about how cultural sciences, by which he means a variety of different disciplines, as you'll see in today's translation, do not do that. And so he talks about how in the cultural sciences, doing the science is part of the thing that you're studying. And so to study culture is to create culture. And so that creates a situation where in the last episode, all it said was, it's not like that being, you can claim there to be a true or false answer. And so in today's episode, he's going to elaborate on that. So let's go ahead and start translating. As is often the case in German, this sentence does not begin with the subject. The subject is a few words in, but that's because there's an adverbial modifier here, which we will actually start with in English as well. So here, the alternative, right, wrong, so these terms here, right, wrong, is in apposition to the alternative. Here, the alternative, right, wrong, loses its validity because the positions, or you might say states, of the mind to reality are manifold. So let's just quickly look at a couple of things about this first half of the sentence. I want to highlight something here that it gives us an example of a case in English, and it might be the only sort of case in English, where English actually does the same word order as German, and it's the word order of German that we think is weird, okay? But if you are a user of the English language, I can show you that, in fact, in this particular kind of construction, we do the same thing where we put the verb in second position, and we put the subject after the verb. However, in English, we only do it when we are using sort of spatial adverbial modifiers, and we only do it if our verb is a verb of motion. But when you say, here comes the bride, or there goes my friend, you have just done something which is totally characteristic of German. You started your sentence with an adverbial modifier. You then followed it with the verb and put the subject after the verb. So for whatever reason, in English, those are kind of frozen forms, but they do show you that there is a kind of intuitive relationship between English and German, not just in terms of, cognate words, of which there are many, and almost all the words in this sentence, many of them anyways, are cognates of English words. But it also shows you that even at the level of syntax, there are some affinities between German and English, especially in frozen English forms. And I just find it's always helpful to think about those cases in English where we do what we think is so weird about German, and yet we actually do it in English too. We just haven't noticed. But anyway, so German does the same thing. It's just that it does it with all kinds of verbs and all kinds of adverbial modifiers. But it's just kind of interesting to think about that case. So even though this is all one sentence in German here, separated by a semicolon or a colon, this second part of it is grammatically its own sentence. And so it follows the same structure as a full sentence would follow, which is why the first letter is uppercase as well. So we can go ahead and start translating. But as we do, I just want to remind us that when we're trying to figure out how to work through a German sentence, I say it's best to just read them from the beginning. But if you find that daunting to do, because this is such a long beginning before you get to any kind of verb, you just have to remind yourself that when you start reading a German sentence, you are going to encounter one of two things. Either you're going to encounter the subject of the sentence, or you're going to encounter some kind of modification. So in this sentence above, we see this adverbial modifier here, and then you have your verb, right? And then the subject. So it's very straightforward. If that adverbial modifier was not there, the sentence would have begun with the subject. And those are basically the two options. And so that's all you have to concern yourself with when you start reading. What am I looking at? Is this a subject, or is it some kind of modification? And in the case of a modifier, it's either going to be an adverb, or it's going to start with a preposition, because it'll be a whole phrase that's got some kind of modification function. And so it's pretty easy to start thinking about that and to just kind of relax and go, okay, I've got a really long subject in this case, or I've got a really long modifying phrase of some kind. So in this case, it's the subject. A Gothic and a Baroque aesthetic. It's a big compound subject with several appositional parts. A Catholic and a modern Protestant dogmatic or theology. A romantic and a puritanical ethic. And then you finally get to the second element in the sentence, which is going to be the verb, können. Here it's an auxiliary verb. So, same in English, can, never, easily. Now, when you have an auxiliary verb, of course, recall that it's going to be complemented by an infinitive at the end of the clause. So here's your infinitive, werden. And in this case, because the verb that's complementing it is werden, you also are going to expect that you're dealing with most likely a passive construction. And what you need to validate that is a past participle of another verb. And so you have that here in this verb, which means to mark or identify in some way. So all of these things can never easily be marked or identified as right or wrong, true or false. So that just expands on the idea from the previous sentence. Real quick, I know this video is getting long. Monday's videos often are, but I think you'll find this helpful as well, just to remind you, when you're trying to figure out what a word is so that you can look it up in the dictionary, it's just good to keep in mind a few things about German morphology. So this word right here, if you were to want to look this up in the dictionary, you could actually go and look it up in the G section, and you might find it because many participles are actually listed as participles, and then it would just tell you what the form was to go look up in the rest of the in the other part of the dictionary. But what you can always do in this case is you want to remove the ge on the front because that's characteristic of a past participle in German. You want to then take off this morphology at the end because that's telling you that it's in participial form as well, and probably in the past tense, although the ge already tells you that. And then you just want to put en on the end. So you're going to look up kennzeichnen, and that's what you're going to find in your dictionary that means something like marked or identified.